To fully inhabit this moment, you have to merely see that you've never inhabited any other moment. You didn't come from somewhere and you're not going somewhere. How do you see this? Well, really, there are two ways that work together. One is to die into the sounds and movement and sensations and clarity and emptiness that is just this. That is the unconditioned by mind, perception, memory, etc. So we inhabit this by letting it completely overtake, such that there's no sliver of doubt, self-reference, time, control, and it becomes rather salient, rather luminous. The other way, and I think this is critical to not overlook this, is to deconstruct the illusory hooks that keep pulling attention or pulling our sense of clarity off kilter into this space of recalling me as I was, me as I am, me as I should be or could be, and where I'm going and what I want and what I want to accomplish and what I think should be here and what I think shouldn't be here. Now, this sounds like a tall order and it can be daunting. And in the containment of mind identification, it's really kind of tragic or scary or terrifying to try to let go of all that. But in the presence that is just this, it's just obvious. There's no root. There's no substance or source for anything you could take yourself to be. So there's nothing to let go of either. All that's really being dissolved is a view or a collection of views. The view of the past, the view of the future, the view of loss of the past, the view of loss of the future, the view of self, the view of losing a self. All of these can pretty easily be let go of if you're open to seeing that they are the hooks. They're just the hooks for attention. Attention meaning attention moving from resting in this clarity, from resting in this presence, this non-dual experience, this non-dual appearance, to this internal reflection of mind where there's already a problem. By the time those hooks have your attention, the assumption of a problem is already there. And so you're always going to try to solve that problem. And that could be a problem of continuity. You're trying to maintain what you think you were from the past. Could be a problem of resolving a cognitive, some kind of cognitive dissonance about who you think you are in reference to what's actually happening here, which if there's a comparison, it's not actually what's happening here. It's just comparison of the idea we have about ourselves or how we should be or what we should do or how we should act to our interpretation of what's happening now, which is still in the past. It's just a moment in the past instead of a year or a decade in the past. So we're comparing the very, very recent past to the distant past and trying to keep some kind of sense of an illusory self afloat. That's the view. But it's not necessary. It's just a thought, ultimately. So there's views that tend to form at all times. I made a video, I don't know, a few days ago. I think it posted, by the time this comes out, it'll have posted like 10 days ago. But it's dissolving the final filter. And this is part of what I'm talking about when I talk about dissolving the final filter, is to see how it is that these hooks get into you. And there is a buy-in. There's a sort of personal in quotes, buy-in. There's a momentary choiceless choice to go down that mind road. Or we could say it this way. Instead of turning it into a choice, we could just say there's an ability to see more closely than we had before. There's an ability to see things more clearly, more closely, more precisely, such that we recognize, oh, okay, it's not automatic that the selfing begins. There's a gap, as there always is. There's a gap between, we could say, stimulus and response, to put it in a more scientific way, but we could say there's a gap between presencing, these empty, luminous, intimate appearances, that is this appearance. There's a gap between that and when that starts to turn into something for you, or starts to turn into a you navigating it, including a you that's waking up, or the you that did wake up, or a you that can't wake up, or a you that's suffering, or a you that's ended its suffering. It's like quicksand. The sense of me, the sense of I, is just quicksand. But again, you can see it in a very granular way if you're willing to keep looking closer and closer, and it will reveal itself as it starts up that engine of meing, and recognize those views that come into play. And they can be a view about anything, really, but they're always anchored in the self, right? Like I said, it can be a view of self. It can be a view of no self. It can be a view that there isn't a self. You can identify with that. An identification can occur around that, of course. It occurs around anything. There's nothing special either about spirituality. I think some people would say, sort of modern speakers sometimes say, the final obstruction is your spiritual seeking. It's like, no, seeking didn't start with spirituality. That's just the latest iteration of it. The seeking mechanism runs very deep, and it happens very quickly, and the gap doesn't even appear to be a gap for a long time until you look closely and precisely at this. When you start looking at it very closely, it's fascinating to see what's actually occurring and what's not occurring, and how suffering really isn't intrinsic to aliveness. Suffering is not intrinsic to appearance. It's not intrinsic to these non-dualistic appearances, whatever they are. It's not a necessary field of suffering. It's not a necessary causation of suffering. Suffering is something that happens once there's a certain kind of buy-in. And that's good news. It's good news to see that we can look closer, or we can see that there is again, I don't want to get too philosophical by calling it a choice, but it feels like a kind of choice that we don't realize we're making. So choice is a strange thing to talk about, because in one sense there's no choice, but just like with self, it's like you can say there's no self and just believe that and just go on about your business being completely mind identified, or you can actually see what the self is, look at it closely enough until you start to realize the direct experience of what feels like a self, and that's often a very significant realization. And then you can penetrate that even deeper and see what it's made out of, right? In Buddhism, it might be called the aggregates, right? Or, other ways of talking about it. But as we penetrate those experiences, then we actually get to a realization and insight of what's not there. But to believe it too early is not helpful. Just like to believe there's no will or no choice too early is not helpful. It can actually lead you astray. So it's better to see that there are experiences, I'll call them experiences, that seem very much like choice, that are happening so fast that they don't feel like choice. You're overlooking them. That's why looking closely and more precisely is helpful. And when you look closely and precisely enough times for long enough, then you do see that there is a gap here. And then you don't have to worry about whether there's a choice or not. You can just see that it's not necessary for attention to move into that selfing mechanism, that selfing space, that house of mirrors. And it will stop on its own. So yeah, don't overcomplicate this, this business about suffering and self. Watch for the self view that's trying to get out of a self. Watch for the self view that is the no self view. All of those can be a self view if they feel like a view. I'd rather you investigate the nature of view itself. The nature of view, that's why I talk about thoughts a lot. I talk about beliefs a lot. I talk about inquiry a lot, because open-ended inquiry is a beautiful tool because it doesn't assume anything, and it also isn't even looking for a conceptual answer if done right. So it can open you to clarity. It can open you to see things more and more and more clearly and precisely, which in and of itself will clarify everything. This is all about clear seeing. And the beauty of this, the wonderful, wonderful beauty of this is that nature or reality or the unconditioned or the unborn, it isn't your enemy, and it's not here to harm you or hurt you or cause you to suffer. The suffering is a discord between what's actually occurring, let's say, or the appearances as they are, unfiltered by mind and concept and belief and clinging and aversion. It's the difference between that unfiltered experience, and what we actually really hold to be true, what we hold to be what's actually happening. And that's just, we're covering the experience in a sense, or we're just looking at it through a veil or a lens. That's all that's happening. It's very simple, but it's not the fault of life or the unconditioned. It's rather innocent. And appearances and sensations and sounds and colors and forms and movements and stillness and all of the rest is just total innocence. It has no agenda, and it has no view at all. And that's the beauty of it. It has no view. The human has a view, an agenda. Every view has an agenda built into it, whether you see it or not. It can be helpful to look into that as well. Like, what is the agenda of this view? What do I actually want? What am I trying to manipulate reality into giving me or taking away? And see that. That's where your struggle is. That's where your pain is. It's not in reality. It's in your layers of insistence and resistance. That's where it is. That's where the suffering is. Yeah.